Thank you. I'm going to give you a longer reading to start this morning. This is a reading from Phil Porter, who he's going to actually be with us. He was an important teacher of mine. He started this body of work called Interplay with a colleague, Cynthia Winton Henry, and he's going to come and guest preach with us in a couple of weeks. But this is from a book he titled The Slightly Mad Rantings of a Body Intellectual. So, buckle your seatbelt. Being in your body, what could that possibly mean? Isn't the body a temporal shell that we will cast aside like the carapace of a molting cicada? Won't we move on to something more noble, more ethereal, like those togaed gods in the movies wafting around clouds pumped from an offstage fog machine? Won't the true beauty of our souls finally be revealed at the end of time so we can cast aside our concern for our wrinkly skin, lumpy thighs, hair that grows only where it shouldn't, and all the unseemly burps and urges of day-to-day life? Won't we finally be light and lithe? Don't you wish? A few hundred years of accumulated culture and language have convinced us that the true us is separate from our bodies, trapped in the envelope of our skin, our beautiful spirits bouncing from edge to edge, edgy to escape. But face it, here we are, all arms and legs akimbo, full of snaky veins and fatty corpuscles. We are firmly rooted on, in, and of the earth. Try as we might to rise above it in ourselves. To be in our bodies is to embrace the fullness of physicality. We stroll, we jog, we lean on the frame of a door. That's physical. We stroll and dance and recline and fart and make love, and it's all physical. We imagine and we compute and we analyze and we fantasize, plot and plan, even when we do this sitting absolutely still, which we rarely do. It is still physical. We feel and fear and love and have the greediest desires. We rejoice and lament and tremble in our boots, and it's all physical. We face the darkness, the awe overwhelms us. We commune with infinity. Our hearts murmur with the most mysterious God talk, and it is all physical. Body, mind, heart, spirit, it's all one, not kept in separate compartments like the knives, forks, and spoons in the silverware drawer, but all jumbled together. Our experience is as specific and varied as the potato masher, the cheese slicer, the garlic press, and hundreds of other kitchen utensils we can hardly identify by name or function. We are a delightful mystery, full of inexplicable surprises and the simplest of pleasures and pain. But how did we get where we are today, all self-conscious and gangly and embarrassed of ourselves? We should be plumped up like arrogant roosters, our fullness ruffling every feather. Instead, we slump or wobbly in wobbly shame, not quite ready to claim the all of who we are, have been, will be. At some tragic point in our life, mere months after birth, we passed out of that all too short phase where everything we did was adorable, charming, amusing, and entered into the land of no. From then on, someone or another was telling us, don't do that. Parents, teachers, preachers, bosses, all had expert opinions about what we shouldn't be doing. Is it any wonder, then, that over time our physicality became more and more restricted and restrained? Surely but surely the ropes were wrapped around us until we could barely move. Yes, sitting still is a valuable skill to learn, but did we have to stop breathing as well? So ends the reading. Do you have an early memory of being told no? I had a wonderful preschool. I went to a Montessori preschool just actually down the hill, Cedar Creek Montessori at the Friends Quaker Church there, and it really was an incredible school. I got to kindergarten and I was well advanced, and I got to skip right to first grade. But one of my strongest memories from Cedar Creek Montessori is the time I got in trouble. We were playing in the backyard there on the play structure, my friends and I, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. If you don't know about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, congratulations. But they were very popular at the time. I think they're still around. They were named after Renaissance artists, and each of them had a different weapon, and so we were practicing our martial arts. We were in formation. We weren't fighting each other. We were just, practicing how to throw a punch and hit with. I liked Donatello with the staff, and that was not allowed at Cedar Creek Montessori School. And it was one of my first lessons in the power of shame to contain and confine the body. I don't think it was any teacher's intention to shame us, but that no to something that was, I think, a perfectly appropriate developmental activity of this healthy aggression, to know that it was not permissible, it was dangerous. And to discover that the body is dangerous, can be destructive, is a powerful lesson, and one that led me to believe it's much safer to keep my body seated and still, to focus on the life of the mind. And I practiced that diligently for decades. And my guess is I'm not the only one in this room. This element in our culture, this suspicion of the body, the elevation of the mind or spirit, it's of course quite old. Here's just another short piece from Porter's book. This piece is called Body Spirits. He said, someone in the past, long since dead, or maybe a committee of the faithful, also long since dead, decided that the body and spirit were mortal enemies that could never get along. That crowd may have just been having a bad hair day, but years of culture and language have propped up this point of view. We have even been led to believe that one is good and the other is suspect, and you and I know which is which. Where did all this go wrong? Somewhere back there, human experience began to be divided up into neat little categories. I'm sure it was a good idea at the time, but we have mastered separation and categorization. What we need right now is to pull it all back together, to see how richly intertwined all of our experience is, to have it all together. Thoughts, feelings, and those glimpses of a bigger reality that we call spirit are all physical experiences, much like any other physical sensation we experience in our bodies. The trouble is, with all of that neat categorization, dividing things up and creating this hierarchy of the mind-body split, it's not just that the mind and the body got separated. More is ascribed to these categories than just mind or spirit and the body. We map so much onto the hierarchy. Patriarchy uses this dualism to associate men with the higher realm of the mind, women and trans people as closer and partly the body. As European colonialism spread across the globe, this Enlightenment logic elevated whiteness as the purest, the most spiritual ethnicity, made whiteness as a feature of bodies invisible even. seen as the norm, the blank slate, while black and brown bodies, all bodies of color, associated with the lower physical plane. Right? In this country, it was believed that black bodies didn't even have souls. This split rooted itself in the animal and the human being completely separate. And while, of course, that materially benefited some and had dire destructive consequences for others, it's also true, I think, that this separating, it harmed all of us. One tiny example, in case you're not aware, do you know that those of us who attend these predominantly white Protestant congregations, we are made fun of all the world round for our inability to clap on the 2 and the 4? Do you know this? Oh, I still struggle. I really appreciate when we got strong leadership with the clapping. I had a trauma. My minister, when I was 12 years old, I was trying to clap along. I was a worship associate up front, and I was not on. And he came and stood right behind me and grabbed my hands and clapped for me in front of the congregation. And I brace myself every time I clap in church still. Because the body remembers, the body holds on to these experiences, tries so hard to keep us safe. One of my other teachers, Rebecca Parker, are one of our eminent theologians of contemporary Unitarian Universalism. She has an essay she titled Vulnerable and Powerful. Vulnerable and Powerful. Humanism from a feminist perspective. She's trying to offer a corrective for our humanism that has so often focused on the power and capacity of human beings to bring about the world we dream of, but that has sometimes lost sight of our vulnerability. And so Rebecca's going to lead us to the subject of this morning's exorcism. The Enlightenment tradition, she writes, as represented by Descartes, elevates mind over body to such an extent that it raises doubts regarding the body's significance or even existence. We cannot know the world exists. We can only know that our mental operations exist. We cannot know there's any objective reality. We can only know our subjective experience. This world becomes nothing more than a projection of the mind. You're familiar with this thinking, right? And so she leads us into Descartes' study, and I imagine it strewn with books and papers and a ratty armchair in the corner and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. But that's just all in my head. And so Parker describes Descartes struggling with the question of whether he could be sure he existed. And it's interesting, she says, that Western philosophy reached the point where a human being could sit in a study wondering whether he really existed. Descartes, meditating on this question, came to his famous conclusion, you know it, I think, therefore I am. And now, just for a moment, she says, imagine the other things Descartes could have said. He might have said, I've tasted the sweetness of oranges, therefore I am. I have felt the salt of the sea against the blackberry scratches on my bare legs, therefore I am. I have felt your hand in mine and know that rise of joy at your presence, therefore I am. But Descartes was uncertain of the life of the senses and our connection to each other. He had forgotten the body. Robert Bly, the poet and writer and teacher known for his work in that mythopoetic men's movement, he reports about a pair of dreams Descartes had the night before he concluded, I think, therefore I am. Descartes wrote about these dreams in his journal. The first, he was walking along a road with a great wind blowing, and the wind was so hard he was blown over, and his left side was crumpling up. The left side of his body in tune with the right side of his brain, right? This is how they tell us it all works now. That the split brain researchers, they say it's that dimension of self connected to the life of the emotions, of aesthetics. Descartes dreamed he was losing half of his being. And in the other dream, he was sitting with a dictionary and flipped through the pages in a frenzy while words were vanishing before his eyes. And Robert Bly says, I know what words were disappearing from Descartes' dictionary. They were words like cinnamon and shadow and warm wind. Okay, so I'm taking aim at Descartes because he's such an easy target. He said it so succinctly, but in truth, that dualism that he marked with, I think, therefore I am, it was around well before his time in the 17th century. And maybe it's useful just for a moment to keep traveling that pathway back. There was an episode of that podcast on being. It was called The Grandeur and Limits of Science. And contemporary physicist Margaret Wertheim was speaking about her writing that reflects on theoretical physics and the context of the wider landscape of our Western philosophy. She, in the interview, noted for medieval people, before the scientific revolution, people saw themselves as twofold. They had a body and a soul. Each of those aspects of human self had a space for being, right? So that medieval mind-body split was taken for granted, the body and the soul. But with coming into being of Newtonian cosmology, she says, the conception of space became purely physical. And this is that fundamental trauma at the heart of the modern Western world, according to Wertheim. She says it's usually said to be because we reconceived of the world as a mechanical system, but I think it's because we reconceived of the world as a spatial system, which no longer had any way of describing the psychological or spiritual aspects of our being. And so if Newtonian physics is right, she's saying, then we don't have a room for the soul at all. How do you fit it in? And that's the dilemma that Descartes is really responding to. He said, yes, there is res extensa, the physical laws of nature that can describe matter in motion through space and time, but there's another beingness, this res cogitans, this realm of thoughts and feeling and emotion and spiritual experience. And while these are distinct, they both exist. They're both legitimate. And while I'm still quite concerned about the codifying the mind-body split and the hierarchy, I think we can forgive Descartes. I'm gonna call off the exorcism, because I think he was trying to do something useful. I like Spinoza's solution more. Came that generation next and said, no, it's all just one piece. But if it didn't come from Descartes, where did this split? Where did it originate? So just one more story. The scene is Gethsemane, the garden. And they've just had that Passover meal, the one that became known as the Last Supper. And Jesus told the groupies gathered around that one of them would betray him, that he would soon die. And it's been an eventful evening, and being the spiritual guy that he is, Jesus asks the disciples to hold vigil, to stay awake through the night and pray with him. Holding vigil, it's one of those archetypal spiritual practices that you've probably engaged in, probably experienced, whether you've named it as such or not. Waiting for news of a loved one, attending a sick bed, curling up around a beloved pet as it becomes clear they will soon die. Waiting on a hard, long pregnancy, even tossing and turning awake at night, disturbed by something in the news that's quickened your heart, shaken by some event in your life. Any of these can bring us into this state of holding vigil. And here's the thing about holding vigil: the physicality and the spirituality of the experience are inseparable. The body doesn't simply fade away while the spirit is racked with intensity. No, if you've ever accompanied someone in the hospital, you know how physically exhausting holding vigil is. It's not a separate, mundane experience while the real, meaningful spiritual experience is happening up here in the profound thoughts you're having. No, the physicality is the spirituality. It's all one. And I do think that's the invitation of this season in the Christian liturgical calendar. It's to remember our physicality is our spirituality. As Christians around the world placed ashes on their forehead this week and heard, "From dust you came, and to dust you shall return," it's a reminder of the body as a physical site of spiritual experience. And so I wonder, as we dwell in this season of the body, as we hold vigil through the end of winter, awaiting the rebirth and awakening the resurrection of spring, is there anything that you might want to practice to bring yourself closer, to remove one layer of all the protections we use to keep our bodily reality safe from the world and its harsh desire to change us, as David White would say? And so Jesus, he takes a moment to pray and then comes back to his people to find they've fallen asleep. And Jesus is shocked and mad, but come on, if you've ever been to a Passover Seder, you know how many glasses of wine those people were drinking. And so the story reports that Jesus said to them, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And there it is, right? That mind-body split that we're still struggling with today. Another time we'll talk about how it couldn't have actually been the words of the historical Jesus. He was not drawing on anything in Jewish tradition, in Jewish rabbinical or scriptural tradition. There's no mind-body split. And instead, those scriptures that were written decades or even centuries after his life were understanding him through the lens of Greek philosophers who had been conceptualizing of this mind-body split. Once more, Rebecca Parker reminds us of the stakes, that to doubt the existence of the world is implicitly to doubt grace. The sweet smell of a rose becomes not a gift, but a projection. Nothing was given to us, no cup of water, no sunset, no Beethoven symphony. We dreamed it all up. Doubt this profound leads to senseless violence. Under the influence of the alienated, enlightened mind, it's easy to bomb Baghdad or Gaza or Ukraine because we fail to imagine the reality of other people's lives, cultures, and histories. It's easy to violate the environment, cut down the rainforests, and practice agriculture in a way that makes the earth barren. With an alienated mind, care becomes impossible. So may we have this season of Lent, may we have a little more attention to our senses that allows us to take a little less seriously our thoughts. For our own wholeness, for the wholeness of the planet, let's remember to take a little more stock in the sweetness of the orange, in the sting of salt water against blackberry scratches on bare legs, the warmth of a hand, the sensation of joy. May it be so, and amen.